Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. My dad will be so grateful. See you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.
Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast, where we explore living mindfully on the path to financial independence and beyond. I'm your host, Adam Coelho, and I'm so glad you're here. On today's episode, I'm joined by my new friend, JG Larochette, the founder of the Mindful Life Project, which teaches mindfulness and compassion in 25 schools, serving 11,000 students. JG Larochette is a graduate of St. Mary's College of California, where he received his Bachelor's of Science in Psychology and was a 4-year scholarship player on the baseball team. After graduating, he felt a deep desire to work with children in underserved Bay Area schools. He started his career in education in 2002 as a Playworks site coordinator in Oakland and the Richmond. There, he created a deep bond with the students and families, which inspired him to want to take the culture and climate he created with the youth on the playground into innovating what classroom education could be. In over nearly a decade of teaching, JG learned so much from his students and community and saw how powerful and resilient they were. He, however, saw the huge need for schools to prioritize mental and emotional health and the lack of resources in programs available to low-income schools. In 2012, he and his third graders at Coronado Elementary School in Richmond, California, went through a transformative 6 months of mindfulness, expressive arts, yoga, and performing arts that led JG to leaving the classroom to start the educational nonprofit Mindful Life Project. In the last 9 years, he has led Mindful Life Project into being the biggest direct service mindfulness nonprofit in the country. Mindful Life Project is highly regarded for its innovative direct service programs that have been created specifically to support students who have been exposed to high levels of adverse childhood experiences. JG brings a passion for providing youth deeply impactful services and programs that support students and educators' mental and emotional well-being so that the students can thrive socially and academically, both at school and beyond. And he shares the impact this has been having on student, teachers, and families alike. JG also shares his vision for the Mindful Life Project, which has grown incredibly over the last 9 years to reach over 11,000 students. I was so blown away by the work that JG and Mindful Life Project are doing that I'll be matching up to $500 of donations that come in through this podcast. And so if you'd like to support the work that JG and Mindful Life Project are doing in schools, I invite you to please donate whatever you can by visiting mindfullifeproject.org and clicking on the donate button. Make sure to put Mindful Fire Podcast or Adam in the comments section because I'm going to be matching up to $500 to support the work that JG and Mindful Life Project are doing for our young people. On top of that, because of the generosity of my employer, Google, I'll be able to get my portion matched as well by Google. And so any money that you donate to the Mindful Life Project will be essentially tripling the impact that we can have on young people in schools around the country. You can find the full show notes for today's episode, including ways to get in touch with JG and ways to donate to Mindful Life Project, which will be matched by me up to $500 at mindfulfire.org/35. Let's jump into today's episode. JG, welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
It's awesome to be here, Adam. Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to have you start by sharing with the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're up to in the world.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity for having me here, Adam, and grateful to connect with you, a kindred spirit. I can feel it. So Mindful Life Project is a nonprofit that I started 9 years ago this week because I was a classroom teacher in Richmond, California, and I love being a teacher. I loved it beyond words. And growing up in Berkeley, just 7 miles away from Richmond, there was all the media and all the portrayals of Richmond of being a place that's not safe, that has a lot of violence. And I actually found Richmond to be a deep sense of belonging when I got there. The kids and the families just welcomed me with open arms. And so long story short, I was a playground coordinator. So I organized recess games on campuses in Oakland and Richmond. I was trying to make sure the playground is a fun, safe place to be. I was working for an organization called Playworks. And as I developed as a coach on the playground, I saw that a lot of kids didn't want to go back to class. They're like, I want to stay on the playground with you. And I figured, yeah, of course you do, because class is a little harder. But the messages they told me were really a little different. They were saying, I don't feel like I belong in class. I feel like I'm stressed out all the time in there. I don't feel like I'm being heard or valued. And this was a message I was getting a lot from kids. And in that experience of hearing kids, I was like, wait, what if I took this idea of having fun, sense of belonging, making learning experiences enjoyable, like I was using the playground, let me do in the classroom. So I became a classroom teacher, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And in that experience, I found myself really excited about creating safe, trusting, loving spaces, making sure that every kid knew that they were unconditionally cared for. And I would not judge them based off anything but their authentic self in that moment. But in our community and the systems by which we live in this country, a lot of our kids have generational trauma, lack of resources, not enough supports, families are overwhelmed. And so there's a lot of trauma happening. And so I pushed myself, Adam, for years, trying to keep on being a great teacher. And that led to some big burnout in 2011, anxiety and depression. And that anxiety and depression riddled me to a point where I didn't even know if I was alive, to be honest. I remember not sleeping, not functioning, like still showing up to school because I was told I have to keep teaching. But then it felt like a fog that I just didn't even know what I was doing. My kids that year had a lot of trauma as well. And that trauma and my suffering was combustible. And so there was daily experience where kids were dysregulated. I was dysregulated. And so that led me to try to find any way to heal. And after many months of real deep suffering, I found mindfulness, and mindfulness saved my life. So with the 3rd graders that year, I came back with a practice. I was like, hey, I learned something. Can't you see I'm feeling better? I want to teach it to you too. And so Mindful Life Project was born 9 years ago, and we're a nonprofit that directly serves 11,000 kids now. So I left the classroom and started this work. 32 amazing, talented, diverse people that provide mindfulness-based social emotional learning to schools, vulnerable schools in the Bay Area, 25 schools in the Bay Area. And we do a lot of work statewide and nationally now. It's really about creating programming that's direct service that empowers young people, empowers teachers through mindfulness, gives families mindfulness as well. And it's been a journey, but I must say, as like the full circle of the 9th year right now, as a classroom teacher, I didn't want to delegate because I wanted to make that space exactly how I wanted as a classroom teacher. Now to think of how I've been able to support other leaders and people in my organization and beyond to make sure that mindfulness is spreading in education is beyond humbling.
Yeah, that's incredible. And congratulations on 9 years. Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
So when you say direct service mindfulness, what exactly does that mean? And what does that look like practically with the kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. So direct service mindfulness is the opposite of train the trainer. So most of what we see in education, and even beyond that, but especially in education systems, is that we put a day-long professional development for teachers, tell them this is a new thing they're going to teach, maybe 2 or 3 days if we're lucky. And then they have to teach it themselves and hold that curriculum. If it's math, science, reading, music, social emotional learning. Direct service means we're on school grounds in our 25 partner schools in the Bay Area with a coach that's our employee that's providing 2 main programs for students. And they're there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., either virtually this year in the pandemic, but obviously we're in person. And we're becoming part of that school culture. And so what we're doing is we're teaching 2 programs, one called Rise Up, which is our flagship program. When I was a teacher, one of the things that came up a lot from kids was, I don't want to go to anger management. I don't want to go to the counselor. I feel like I'm being labeled as a bad kid. I don't want to have this stereotype of who I am and that I'm a problem. So when I started talking to my former students and my youth that year in 2011, what I actually thought was, they still wanted that small group intensive, instead of 25, 30 kids in a class. They wanted to grow, but they also wanted it to be a mixed group. So in Mindful Life Project Rise Up program, kids that are suffering the most because of generational trauma or suffering the most because of trauma in their lives are the ones who are pushed out of school systems, detentions, referrals, suspensions, expulsions. They actually need to be brought closer into the school environment. And so that's what Rise Up really became, was 5 kids per grade level that we pull out of class for 45 minutes, teaching mindfulness with yoga, expressive arts, and performing arts, specifically mindful hip hop, and creating these resources so the kids that need it the most, as well as 3 high achievers per grade level, are building non-judgmental communities. So that's our first flagship program. And what we saw, Adam, was that we took kids out of class for 45 minutes. We built compassion and care through our mindful skills, teaching the mindful skills on a weekly basis. Through the other modalities, there was a lot of empowerment, a lot of behavioral change, And most importantly, there was a lot more compassion to self and compassion to their peers. But we take them back to class in that first few months, and far too often, the kids would go to class and something would trigger that fight, flight, freeze responses. It might have been another kid looking at them away, might have been a teacher's voice, it might have been just something that happened. And so I went to the drawing board late nights in 2012 thinking, what can we do to really then add another direct service element that creates a community of compassion and mindfulness, but also helps teachers versus makes teachers have to do something else. So we created Mindful Community, which is our second main program. We push into every classroom at a school, teaching mindfulness-based social emotional learning in a very culturally relevant, very engaging, very fun way. And that is our program that reaches every kid and every teacher's in the room. And they start to understand the practice, build the practice, have vocabulary, and then they get trained in it as well. And so we also added now in the last couple of years, Mindfulness for Teachers Weekly, Mindfulness for Families in Spanish and English Weekly, to really build a mindful and compassionate school community with our partners. And then the train the trainer model, we also do some of that, but we see implementation rates, Adam, in low income, vulnerable communities. When we put a curriculum in those communities, the teachers burn out, teacher turnover, principal turnover, curriculums don't last very long. And also mindfulness is transformational, it's relational. So we want to make sure that it's being held by the person who has a passion for it versus, oh, we teach mindfulness to kids because kids need it. It's actually, no, we teach mindfulness to each other because we all need it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always been something that stood out to me. A lot of these organizations train the trainer. I think that's the model of mindful schools. And that's great. But like you said, teachers don't need another thing to do. They got plenty going on, especially this year. And so, yeah, just giving them another thing to do is not really going to be the key. So it sounds like this Rise Up program is kids that maybe are acting up a little bit or would traditionally be labeled as a bad kid, which, like you said, nobody wants to be labeled a bad kid. And you're just creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by doing that type of stuff. And so
100%.
Pulling them closer, and sounds like that group of 5 kids has some high achieving students in it as well.
It's a great memory I have of one of my students saying, hey, I've been in classrooms, and this was first and second grade for this student, where I'm trying to be present and pay attention to the lesson. And when kids misbehave, all the attention goes to that kid. But I want attention too, she said. This is an amazing moment. I remember sitting with her and we're talking as a group about if we create, so the students and I were playing with from this room 18 at my school, Cornell Elementary School in Richmond, what if we create an organization? And what would the programs look like? And what would the name of the organization be? And that day she said something that really stood out to me. And also then I started talking to kids who had been sent to anger management class in my group. And I talked to them about like, why don't you like it? I feel like you're resisting when you're called in there. We come back, you seem very upset. What's going on? I was like, they said every time it feels like we're just the bad kids that need to get help. And we are going to be, and I was like, what if we actually created both sides? First of all, we all have all different needs. Behavioral stuff is basically just representing that we need more attention, need more care, more guidance, and we need time to heal. And the kids who are struggling, you guys need to be able to be with peer groups where there's no judgment. Mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. But guess what? When we call anger management class, that's already judging a kid. You got anger problems. You need to go there. And that moment, like you said, that self-fulfilling prophecy, for me was horrible. And one of the reasons I burned out was because I saw young people in my school or in the community who would be labeled in kindergarten. Oh, don't have him or don't have her because she's such a problem. And that would break my heart. And then my class was like, they're amazing. They're incredible. They're my heroes. So whatever these other folks were saying, the kid also leaned into. So if you're being called, and I've heard all kinds of things, but if a kid's being called something by adults, that kid's going to feel like that's who they are. So what we did was create a community where the kids who are high achieving and kids who are struggling both know that they're both belonging. And they're both belonging beyond belonging, that it's not about if you're bad or good. That's not even a thing. Kids can't be bad, right? Kids are representatives of what's around them. So maybe the systems, maybe there's unhealthy humans, maybe there's reaction, there's trauma. But first of all, there's no such thing as bad. And so then the next piece is like, how do we create community? And so that was this idea of in the playgrounds, kids who have behavioral issues usually hang out with kids who have behavioral issues. Kids who are doing well academically hang out with the kids who are doing academically. What if we built this program where about 40 or 50 kids on the school campus are seeing us twice a week in group and then becoming leaders together in the community? So that way they're front loaded the mindfulness when they're in class, they're participating. And the best thing, Adam, not to go too long, but the best thing within 6 to 8 weeks, usually, we'll bring someone from the school or a visitor to a Rise Up group and say, here's a group of 8 kids. And they walk out like, I don't know who are the behavioral issues. And we're like, exactly. Because when you create a safe space, a trusting space, a space where belonging is always there, and you provide mindfulness skills and compassion skills with that, kids are going to be kids. They're going to be powerful and be resilient. They're going to be connected. So that's the beauty of the work.
Yeah, that's incredible. I really like that element to it. I would assume the high achieving kids want to be involved because it's a special thing and they get that attention that they're craving.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I remember when we first started Rise Up at 3 schools. So it was Coronado is where I taught. The school district said, we won't hire you to be on special assignment. Mindful Schools said, we're going away from direct services. And I was like, this is my community. I got to figure it out. So with no budget, no business plan, I jumped out of the classroom. And what basically happened, I took 3 schools, the school I was at and the 2 nearest schools, and said, we're going to provide Rise Up programming. This is brand new. Give us a chance. And the principals were all for it. And when we started Rise Up, basically what was really interesting is that after sessions, we go back to class and I'll be walking on campus and there'd be kids saying, I want to be in Mindful Life. I want to be in Mindful Life. Every kid wanted to be in Mindful Life, which was what? I was like, whoa. That's when I started thinking about every kid and every teacher having mindful community, which is a second program. But Rise Up was basically the it thing. Like kids wanted to be in it. And we knew from the beginning, I knew that if we're going to create something special, there's no such thing as these are the kids that go to this program, because what we want is actually mindful leadership. We want them to live into their authenticity, their power, their resilience, and to really show their authentic selves. So when we went away from this is for certain kids to actually kids are like, that might be for me. That's actually for me. Like I see myself in either one of those groups. And they didn't know. That was the best part. Kids didn't know who the behavioral issues selection, maybe they internally knew that behavioral issues were out there, but we didn't say we have 5 kids that have behavioral issues because of trauma. We have 3 kids. We said we have a program that's for all community members. And then we graduate kids, right? So once they reach some goals through half the year or the year, then they become mindful mentors and support other people, and other kids can transition in. So we have a cycle of practice and a cycle of leadership.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so do they apply to be in Rise Up, or are they recommended to be in Rise Up? I understand the cyclical nature of it. And I think it's a beautiful thing with the 2 programs complementing each other, with people coming out of the Rise Up with a new sense of belonging and community and connection with maybe the kids that are different than them. But now they're all mentors and they're all leaders and they're example to their peers that they can then build on that and really step into that through the Mindful Community program.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And for us, the biggest thing was how to do 2 things. How do we get kids to want to be in the program? And then that was automatic. The second piece was how do we work with systems, with a school to identify the most in need students? So what we looked at originally, Adam, was that about 7 to 10% of students at those 2 schools, in Eastern Elementary and Coronado, accounted for about 85 to 90% of suspensions. 10% of students, mostly African-American boys, accounted for 85 to 90% of suspensions.
Wow.
So we knew, and I'd known it before, and unfortunately we lost some of our youth at Coronado with gun violence or gang involvement. And I knew like those kids, and I can think of them right now, they were the leaders. They just were never given an opportunity to be leaders in the right way. And so they abandoned themselves to protect themselves. And then they caught up in some situations, unfortunately, that meant that some of our kids ended up killed by gun violence. And there was kind of a normalcy there, I'll be honest, Adam, that was heartbreaking. I saw, especially one of my mentors that had been a teacher for a long time saying, JG, that's going to happen. I was like, no, I will not stay in this school. I will not stay as a teacher if that's the status quo that you as an educator are expecting. One of our leaders. That was where I started having a lot of anxiety and depression because I felt like the system wasn't supporting our youth and families. Educators far too often, I think, come in with the right reasons, but get burned out and stay in this toxicity. And I started falling into that. I was like, wait a minute. How do we really make sure that every kid knows that they have everything to deserve? And so we started creating the programming and we started seeing, all right, let's get those kids that are the highest behavioral issues. First, what we saw, Adam, was one of the main things. The kids were reacting to the environment they were in. I remember this for myself. If I was stressed out and if I was overwhelmed, we have mirror neurons and kids are going to reflect what they see. So a lot of times I'd go into classrooms dropping kids off and I would see the teacher was super dysregulated. And of course, the rest of the class, especially kids with trauma, are going to be dysregulated. And so that's what we're seeing as a cycle of. And so for us, it was like, if we do the Rise Up programming, it's going to be beneficial, but it's not going to be a culture shift for the adults and the kids. And that's where mindful community really had a shift, because teachers who first were like, just get my kid out of class. 3-4 months of us being in their room after time, they're like, actually, I see that I need more mindfulness. I am reacting. I am overwhelmed. I am having a hard time with my emotions. And so we saw that. And I think that goes back to the train the trainer model can be beneficial, especially in communities where teacher turnover is low, where teachers want to practice mindfulness for their own personal well-being first, that then want to bring mindfulness from an authentic place to kids. But that's not the majority of human beings. We've been trained to go external all the time. Go internal? No, that's not okay. So if we really want to create systems change, we have to have direct services over time. And so those two programs really started benefiting and seeing the impact. And then we started seeing teachers that we didn't expect. I need to do mindfulness with you after school. Or families like, we need some mindfulness for us. And so we started creating the programming and trainings to really develop personal mindfulness practice for adults versus train the trainer.
Yeah. I think you've really uncovered a problem with that model. And as solution, you're not forcing anything on anybody. You're offering it, putting it out there, and then allowing through the Rise Up program and the mindful community, you're letting them see, you're letting the teachers see, you're inviting them in. And then you have offerings where they can then practice themselves, the families can practice. And then I imagine when the teachers start to practice, they just want to do it more and bring it more and more into the curriculum.
You're right on. We're data driven. We're always evaluating our impact. And one of the things we saw in Richmond, specifically when we first started, and then in Oakland, and as we started growing our work in different communities, there's a lot more social emotional learning curriculum out there, which is a great thing. However, what we started doing is analyzing our school partners and asking, what percentage of you teachers are using that curriculum? So it's mindfulness-based social emotional learning curriculum or just social emotional learning curriculum. And what we started getting in those early 3-4 years was about 30-35% of teachers were using the curriculum. Because why? We're overwhelmed. We have math, reading, writing, science standards. We just don't have time for it. Okay, fair enough. But the other thing is, I don't know about your experience, Adam, and I'm happy to talk about my experience, but it takes dedication, daily practice to work on emotional intelligence and mindfulness. It, for me, was not a 1-day, 2-day thing. It took months and actually years, especially in the first year. I had such a tremendous growth in 2011 to 2012 in that year, where if I wouldn't have had that transformational personal experience, I wouldn't have been able to teach it well, and I wouldn't have been able to embody it well. And I'm not perfect. I'm 10 years later. I haven't missed a day of mindfulness since then. But the key is we can't expect teachers to be trained in something like emotional intelligence, mindfulness, compassion, and then teach it to kids without a deep self-mastery. And there is that need for teachers to be modeled it for long periods of time, sometimes a year. Sometimes it takes a year for our teachers to see it in front of them weekly. But what we've seen in the last few years is around 87% of teachers that we push into their classroom, we train them in our teacher's manual, so small lessons that can complement our work. 87% of teachers are using it on an average of 6 times a week. So look at that 35% we talked about originally. Now we're talking about 87% and one dosage with us in front of the class. So what we're looking at is actual consistency of practice, implementation, integration, but that takes a year, 2 years of partnering. And then the key is how much longer teachers there. So some of our schools, I'll be honest, we have a couple schools, 85 to 90% of teachers from a few years ago are not there anymore. The principals, not there anymore. Because our broken education system is the problem. Our broken systemic oppression and racism and implicit bias and all the things that happen in our society, we still aren't at an equitable place, even close to an equitable place in education, especially in California, where we're like 40th in spending per pupil in the country. We're the 13th biggest economy in the world, but our education is 40th in the country in spending, right? So there's a lot of issues, but underneath it, we look at mental and emotional well-being has to be the foundation of the school experience for everybody, students, teachers, admin, and everyone.
Totally agree. Let's talk a little bit more about the challenges that exist within the education system and society at large that are causing our kids to suffer. What have you seen there?
Yeah, it's a place close to my heart, Adam, in terms of what I've seen in the systems. So in education specifically, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s in Berkeley, California, where there was a really whole child approach. It was project-based learning. It was beyond reading, writing, and math. Personally, Adam, I actually couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade. But in kindergarten, in 1st grade, and 2nd grade, that wasn't such a forced pressure thing. I became a 3rd grade teacher, so I always laugh about that. Like, I couldn't read till third grade, really, and then became a third grade teacher. And I say that because it was so important. We had project-based learning, whole child learning. It was beyond your test scores or your reading level. My teachers cared for me unconditionally. And I never felt in those 5 years, 5-year-old to a 10-year-old, I never felt like something was wrong with me. But in the last 20, 30 years, we've gone so far from whole child education, especially in the most vulnerable communities. So with No Child Left Behind in the Bush era, where it's you have to score this or you're this, if you score this, your funding is this. There was so much pressure put on schools and districts to achieve academically, which created the exact effect of the stress response. So kids with trauma, kids with stress, teachers with vicarious trauma are now being pressurized like a diamond, right? To then produce academic results, which we know the science of the brain. It's going to go right to our amygdala. It's going to right to our fight, flight, freeze response system. Cortisol, adrenaline, it's going to pump it through our system. And my students didn't have that in my class because I didn't follow that path. I said, boys and girls, I'm going to teach you. You're going to teach me. We're going to do lots of projects. So I was a little bit like a rebel, right? A lot of classrooms across the district I was teaching in, there was this toxicity of stress, this toxicity of like, you are reading or writing or math. And if you're not, we're going to keep pushing until you're doing it. So education has really lost a compass. Within that, we also know that low-income, vulnerable communities generationally have been disserved and underserved. So there's already this anger and frustration and rage to the system from families that have been it, or immigrants, families are coming into the system. There is this kind of feeling of we are not doing you what you deserve. And so I think what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is a really strong perpetuation of divide and conquer. What this country has greatness in is its diversity, its ability to be the true American we lean into, where diversity is welcomed, where we bring and empower our communities and bring equity. But what we see in education is a continuation of colonization, the continuation of underserving, of underrepresenting, of not looking at systemic change, but status quo. And so I think where we're at now, right, in terms of education and systems, is that most people in the systems, and I always say hard on systems, soft on people. Most people in the systems are just doing their very best within the framework that's there. But the problem is the framework that's there is completely not working, especially in our underserved, low-income communities of color. As a generalization, our traditional schools are not looking to innovate and change the systems. They're pretty much staying where they've been. And then now, last but not least, is really the charter movement versus the traditional public school movement. So I just have to name it. My kids go to school here in Richmond, California, a school that I chose. There's bilingual education. There's better opportunities than a mile or two away. And so I think why I am so passionate of making sure that mindfulness, compassion work transform schools from the inside out is because in order for us to transform education, in order for us to innovate education, we have to be in our prefrontal cortex. We have to be in our human brain. And so what I see on a daily basis is when teachers and admin are given authenticity and power to do what they need to do for kids, and when kids are able to use their voice and feel a sense of belonging, when family voice is centered, we're able to really create an educational experience that really is grounded in what we know is best. And I am lucky to say that we have some partners that are doing amazing work doing that. I just think the systems in general aren't helping that at all. They're just doing it because they're able to fight through the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can definitely relate to what you're saying about how the brain works. When we are in that fight, flight, freeze response, when we have cortisol running through our veins, our prefrontal cortex shuts down. So we can't learn. So if our kids are in that environment and the teachers are in that environment, nothing's going to get done. And it's just going to perpetuate the outcomes that the system is continuing to produce. There's a lot there. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the charter versus public. What exactly is the landscape there and what's your perspective on it?
You're trying to get me in trouble, Adam. No, I'm just joking. I am pro excellent schools for children. I'm not pro charter. I'm not anti-traditional. I've given my career to being in the traditional schools that need the most systems change. I think the biggest issue is that there's broken systems in the traditional public school and there's broken systems in some of the charters. However, I also think that politically, the anti-charter movement is putting a lot of energy from our traditional public schools, a lot of political power from our teachers' unions and from communities to really go anti-charter versus innovate the traditional. So my main concern is that I see amazing schools, both in traditional and charter, and I see challenges on both sides. And so what we need to do, and this is what I meant by divide and conquer, what we really need to do is make sure that traditional public schools are held accountable and they look at innovative systems change. We need to make sure charter schools are held accountable and we're looking for innovative change that's student-centered, family-centered, and community-centered. The problem that I see is just like any political issue, it's divisive and it's also deflective. So if we're going to put tons of money into fighting charters, and then also like for me, I taught at the traditional school in South Richmond. My school did what we needed to do to create a transformational change. And once our test scores got high enough, because we went whole child, then we focused as a school, not individuals, but as a school, testing. And then guess what? Boom, our scores went down. Next door, about half a mile away, we had a charter school that I didn't even really know about. And their test scores have continually gone up year after year because they never gave up the foundation. Whole child, community-centered, options for learning, multi-layered approaches. And that's what I saw. So I saw a traditional school that went up and down for the last 15 years. But how in the world are we blaming charters for our disservice in public education? For 50, 60 years, and you could argue hundreds of years because our communities of color have never gotten an education that really is centered on them, we have seen the system be dysfunctional. We've seen a broken education system. It's not because of charters. But what we do is we start projecting and politicizing everything, and then everything is more toxic. So what I'm saying is I don't believe that one or the other is the right solution. I think the right solution is all of us coming together and saying, we're going to innovate education and we're going to change education to truly be equitable, to truly based on our students' voices and truly based on what our families' needs are. And so I think we need to get to that point in our society on multiple layers of saying, hey, let's join in so we can really create a society we can really be proud of.
Yeah, totally agree. And just for my ignorance on the issue, what is a charter school?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's different kinds of charter schools, but they're all from the ones we know. They're all public. They're under the district, but they're not overseen in the exact same way. So basically the school, a charter school, has to go through a process with the school district to get approval. Then it's creating a school. In our community, I'll say Richmond College Prep is an amazing charter that was founded with a Montessori preschool with former educators from the community. And they've grown into organizations that's now TK through 8th grade, providing the amazing education I just mentioned. However, so they get the money for per pupil, and they also can fundraise just like any other traditional school. So all schools are 501c3s, but charters do seem to do a much better job at fundraising outside of state and federal money to support their infrastructure and system. There's more autonomy at a charter school. In some charter schools, there's still teachers unions, but there's more autonomy over hiring. There's more autonomy over systems change. There's more autonomy around spending. So if we look at like community schools, what we were hoping to see was traditional schools that are given the amount of money they deserve, and then the schools themselves allocating the funding towards what they see their students really need. Unfortunately, in big districts, and especially in traditional dysfunctional districts, the money goes put into the general fund, that there's all this spending, and often the schools don't get to use the money for what they see the needs at. And there's a lot of things there. So charter schools are public schools. They're non-private, and they're very different also in the way they come. Some, like I said, highly disorganized. Some have investments and people running it that don't have much to do with education. But from my experience, that's the minority. Just like in traditional public schools, there's tons of dysfunction. There's a lot of issues, but a lot of traditional public schools are doing excellent work. It's that we also just need to look at the systems that best work, right? So if we create traditional schools where they had autonomy of spending, autonomy of choice, autonomy of being able to create a school that they feel is their community school, I think that's where you have to go. And I think charters have a better opportunity of doing that right now within the broken system. I think we just got to make sure traditional public schools, we give principals, teachers, families, and the students' voices the power to create what they deserve.
Got it. That makes sense. So let's transition. What do you see as the solution to these problems? And talk a little bit about how the pandemic may have changed the priorities there. Just an enormous question for
That's
you.
a huge question. I love it though. So I think a couple things pop in my mind, and especially from the lens of mindfulness and compassion and truth telling. I think we have to get politics out of education. Far too often, politics and special interests are controlling the narratives and controlling the resources. So I think when we look at like decision making in school districts, we look at the way school districts stay dysfunctional. All it takes, Adam, is a few people that are benefiting from the status quo or benefiting from being in a position of power to keep a community away from transformation. And so I think politics and school boards and the way, at least we're starting to see some shifts there in our communities here. There's a civil rights lawsuit saying, if you're going to have school boards, you have to actually have school boards represent all the communities. So now we're districted, right? So we have a school board member from each major community. So that's wonderful. That's a great step forward. The next thing after we look at getting politics out of it, it means that we're going student first. And that's why mindfulness and compassion is so important, right? Because when we start to create education that's student-centered and a deep sense of belonging, no matter what the zip code, whatever their sense of what's happening in the world, they understand that they have all that they already need inside of them to be able to be powerful. I think that sense of belonging comes when we look at creating structures and systems and putting people in places where we're not perpetuating stress, where we're not perpetuating this desire to say, these are kids who are well behind, or they need more and more academics. Like what we need as a society is to heal. We need to repair. We need to listen. And we need to be able to be fully present. And the real solution that I think gets us into systems change is actually building our inner capacity to see what's really true inside of us, be present with compassion, and then build in unity based off of missions and visions that are student and family centered. So we see that happening. At Mindful Life Project, we're so honored, right? Beyond humble to see schools, both traditional and non-traditional, that are really trying their very best in a broken education system. And they're succeeding in many ways. And what we see is that thriving communities are places where everyone is seen, valued, heard, and loved. There's no othering. There is a community. So I truly believe that if we're going to change our society, it's going to come from a deep self-awareness, a deep social awareness, a connection to compassion and empathy at where we need to be in equity and where we need to look at investing and autonomy and voice of who's making decisions. And when we start getting there, we see in the microcosm of a school ecosystem or a district ecosystem or a city, we got to make sure that this isn't a fad, that mental and emotional well-being through a social justice lens is a must-have. Because if we're not doing that, then like you said earlier, we can't learn. We actually can't even function as humans properly. So we need to get to a place where we're in our prefrontal cortex, activating it, growing attention, having tough conversations, making tough decisions, and not allowing power and greed to take over. It's got to be students first. And that's where I see us as an organization helping create this innovation of transformation from the inside out.
Yeah. But how do you get politics out of education when you need to convince politicians to do that?
I love it. I love it. So I think there's multi-layers. I think the way I talk about politics is more around the self-preservation, right? So if you're a city council member, a school board member, you're the governor, right? You're a state assembly. What is wrong with politics is that most times the self-preservation is so real that then the decision-making is from a place of self-preservation, not community building. And so that's the major problem. So when I say take politics out, it's actually what politics is about. That you're serving your community. You're serving those that voted you in versus getting caught in, oh, I got this special interest to invest in my campaign. Now I have to do these things. So I think what I want to say is that systems change happens when deep awareness gets to a tipping point. So if we have special interests involved, but they start losing power because we're actually doing what's student and family centered based off of student family voice, that will happen. But it has to happen from a place of deep inquiry. And I know the only place we can do deep inquiry is when we look internally first, ability to see what's really true internally, and then how do we relate to our external world. And I think getting politics out is different than politicians. Politicians need to stay in their lane of being politicians and serving their communities. And when they do that, we've seen that work. We're seeing it across the country. We've seen grassroots, amazing campaigns of people who are speaking on behalf of their community. And I think that's where we're going to see shifts in the society where we go away from special interests, self-preservation, toxicity, and power. And we start making the shift towards we, not me, and that me without we is not true. We without me is not true. As Dr. Dan Siegel says, it's we, right? We're all interconnected. We have to look out for each other's best interests. I think that has to happen at a lens of, as white community members, as white people, even myself, I'm the only person born in this country for my family, but I still have a duty to make sure that what I benefited from doesn't happen to my son. That because he's a white male, he's not given all of these kind of opportunities that a Black or Latino male wouldn't get. So I think that we have to be really away from self-preservation, because when it comes down to it, we've seen politics in the last 4 or 5 years be about clinging to something that's not even true, this desire to hold on to the America that is in the mind of that person or group of people, America that's not even real.
For me, honestly, it comes down to money in politics.
100%.
The self-preservation, when you are reliant on people giving you money to fund your campaign to stay in power, you very quickly forget about the constituents that you are supposed to be serving. I agree with you 100%. We need to know ourselves. We need to be able to have compassion for ourselves, be in a place of equanimity as much as possible, and have empathy for other people. We talk about America. I love America, but I hate half of Americans. That's not a good system that we have here. And I think we really need to bring people together. I don't know how it's going to happen. And I think you're right on. The schools are the place to do that, because if we can create that compassion, mindfulness, empathy into the schools, into the students and the people, students are people, they're going to go out. That's how we change this whole situation.
I have hope. I have optimism. I didn't at times in my life. And I think what's beautiful about that is education is the foundation of a society. And if we transform education to being about deep mental and emotional, physical well-being and sense of belonging, hurt people, Adam. We know that. And we will start seeing such a different approach to our human lived experience, and then connection to systems change. And we see that in our young folks. Currently, I can think of so many people in so many places across the country where if we let the young folks lead, the systems would be changed and they would create an equitable environment. Your son and my kids, we know that's a long journey, but if we're going to get there, I truly believe it's because we're building consciousness in society as individuals and building compassion for our own experience. So we know that we don't have to project on anybody else. Oh, that's self-preservation. You think about the politics, right? That's like the kid who got picked first for kickball, who got voted in because he had enough money to get voted in, but then had to butter up to the guy who picked him first every time to get picked first again, even though they weren't playing very well. I think that's where we have to change things, because if we're looking at politics based off of that, of course we have to change in terms of financing campaigns and all that stuff. But we also have to get away from people feeling that they have to do for others to belong. Do what's right for all, because that's what's going to make you belong, versus one big company or one individual.
Yeah, absolutely. We're solving the world's problems here, JG. So talk to me a little bit about your vision for Mindful Life Project.
It started off with 3 schools in one community, and currently in 9 cities with our direct services, and a little over 25 schools in Salinas, Monterey, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Atlanta, Stockton. So we've been growing this very organically. We know there's only a handful, if even that, of direct service mindfulness organizations in the country. Most of where mindfulness education has gone is train the trainer or an app or online. We do believe that an app or online things are good supplemental supports, but we also know that I wasn't changed because of a curriculum. I wasn't changed because of something else. I was changed because I learned mindfulness from some powerful individuals, from Megan Cowan that was at Mindful Schools, who took me under her wing, to Vinny Ferraro, to a bunch of other folks, including Rushika. I've been given an opportunity to learn this practice because of a connection. I had Jack Kornfield doing Monday Night Talk, my first mindfulness experience that was like 30 minutes practice. So what we need to do is not let only a few organizations be direct service. We either need to amplify those voices, Holistic Life Foundation, Calmer Choice, ourselves here in the Bay, Mindful Life. Those can't be isolated. So we are growing, expanding based off of communities wanting us there and us understanding their communities. With that being said, we are a nonprofit. So we run a very hard system. So about 35% of our overall budget is through contracts of service. We know that if we're going to work in the lowest income schools, we're not going to be able to get the funding, the contracts that we could get in a middle or high income community. We know that as a challenge. We want to grow our services to get about 50% earned revenue. Right now, we're about 33, 35. That means philanthropy, from foundations to individual donors to corporate sponsors, are the other 65, 67%. Before the pandemic, we had a mental health crisis for our youth and our society as a whole. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris says it's the silent pandemic before the pandemic. We're in the worst mental health crisis since World War II, and we can't even know the full grasp of what's going to happen in the years to come. So we're in a position right now to grow our work and scale our work significantly. And we only want to do that in strategic, community-based ways. So we're looking at different areas. We work in Salinas, Monterey, Stockton, LA, Atlanta, Kansas City. We want to continue to grow and scale our direct service work because we see that first and foremost, our mindfulness coaches that are on the ground at the school sites are the transformation. Usually our coaches are from or deeply connected to the communities they work in. Usually our students are represented because a lot of our staff, including 5 of my past students, have been in the Mindful Life Project as an organization. They're now the coaches. They're now the program manager, right? They're people who have built the organization. So I think we're in a place of scaling and growth, but we want to do it in the right way. And we're going to need some special investments, right? We're going to have some strong investments from foundations and from individuals and folks who actually are putting mindfulness in place. And that's where I think Adam is a curiosity, right? We know the Headspaces. We know the Calm apps. We know these companies are now being put as billion-dollar companies. I am calling everyone out. If your company is making significant profit from mindfulness, you need to invest in organizations like ours or those other ones I mentioned, because those organizations on the ground doing the work. So my hope is that we can grow this with the people who are bringing mindfulness to the masses in different ways, so we can make sure our most vulnerable communities that have such deep resilience and power actually are offered these programs.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I like that call out. I think you're absolutely right. Are you having those conversations?
I've met with Headspace and Calm in different times. Wonderful individuals. I'm always told we can donate some apps. And I just want to tell everyone out there, if you're listening, if you're at Calm or Headspace or any other, Insight Timer is donating to the teachers on there. But they're also donating nonprofits. And they're not one of the billion-dollar mindfulness apps. They are paying me. I donate my pay that I get on that app for teaching mindfulness. I donate to another nonprofit. So I'm not only saying them, I'm calling out all the companies in the country that are using mindfulness to increase profitability, to really dig deep right now. If you're listening, we need you, because what will happen is that people will use the app. That's great, but it might not be enough. I have kids now, they're 18, 19, that said, hey, if it wasn't for Mindful Life Project when I was in 5th grade, I would have got lost in drugs, alcohol, and gun violence. The app is great as a supplement, but we need human beings that have transformation in them, that are adults on campuses, to do the work. And then we can send the apps out to the families. We have an app ourselves, but we really need to see investments in mindfulness for our communities, specifically our youth. I just hope to see that in the near future.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And while we're talking about that, if people want to contribute to the Mindful Life Project financially, how do they do that?
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so we're a nonprofit. Any donation is tax deductible. You can do it by going to our website, mindfullifeproject.org. You'll see a donate button right there. You can also send checks to us, and that would be to Mindful Life Project. And I'll slowly say our address. So our office is at 124 Washington Avenue, Suite B, Richmond, California, 94801. And we're at an end of the year push right now. We're coming to our fiscal year ends June 30th. Any donation, small and big, goes a long way. Our programs are very efficient in spending, and we are super proud of how far we make a dollar go in our organization. So any donation or any connection to a company, any sponsorships, any of those things we're in for it. And right now we're in such an exciting moment where we really want to meet this moment, meet this pandemic, meet our schools to really scale our work. We know it's going to be hard because financially the country is suffering as well, but we hope to make it happen because our communities need it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening to this, I'm feeling called to contribute. I would love to match any donations that come from this podcast.
Yeah.
I would love to match anything that comes in up to $500.
If you do donate online or on check, you can say Mindful Fire or Adam's name and we'll be able to track it.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll do that. And then I can get my matched by Google. And so we can triple your impact. Ooh. So if you're listening to this, I would love to be able to match your donation to the Mindful Life Project to increase this work, spread this mission of mindfulness and compassion to more schools around the country.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. That means so much. This opportunity to talk to you and be with you is such an honor. And I love what you're doing. You're spreading the practice. You're doing it from a place of really trying to make a difference in people's lives. So it's just been an honor to be with you here today.
Likewise. Yeah, I feel like I've learned so much and we've touched on a lot of really important topics. There's so much here and it's such important work. Let's transition now to what I call the Mindful Fire Final Four. And the first question is, as someone who wants to bring this to my community, my son is only 2.5, but there are schools in the area. I don't know what they're doing, if they're doing anything. Someone who's hearing this and saying, I want to do something. I want to bring this to my community. What options are there to do this work with you?
I love it. Yeah, that's the way we're seeing our scaling growth is taking people in communities that want to champion this, to get trained by us, to potentially start their own nonprofit if they'd like. So we do a lot of supports for folks. We believe that our curriculum is one of the most innovative, culturally relevant, engaging, fun curriculums out there. We have 3, our TK through 2nd grade curriculum called the Brain House, where kids get to know the downstairs part of the brain. So that reptilian part, the amygdala, the friends that are in the downstairs brain are Angry Rex. They're stuffed animals. So Angry Rex is a dinosaur. There's Sad Selena. There's Excited Esperanza. There's Nervous Nasir. There's Bored Brandon. And the downstairs friends are always welcome. We learn how to be with them, but they sometimes need help. And so upstairs friends are the prefrontal cortex. And those are also stuffed animals. And we have Breathing Bruno, Listening Leslie, Body Scanning Sammy. We have Name It Nasir. We have all these different characters. And so what we're doing with our little ones, and then 3rd and 4th grade, we have our upper grade curriculum, is deepening stillness practice, deepening skills, using what they learned in the first part to being relational mindfulness. How do we get this mindfulness practice out of our personal to what we do around our world? And then our middle school curriculum is super innovative. So people can come reach out to us on our website or email me at jg@mindfullifeproject.org, just initials jg@mindfullifeproject.org. And we will definitely support that. So if the folks want to do trainings and then maybe start piloting their kids' schools around this community, we've been supporting that across the country and we've seen some great success. So that's one way. And I think it's a great way. There's also great organizations out there doing other training. So Calmer Choice is one that pops to mind, Holistic Life in Baltimore. So there's always great other organizations. I would try to stay away from the more online only because it's really relational and then building the internal capacity at the site.
Yeah, it sounds like the direct service mindfulness is really the key to this. And so is your curriculum open source, so to speak, or do you license it to people? What does that look like?
That's a great question. Currently, the curriculum, once we train, so there's 2 levels. There's mindful educator training, which is usually 5 to 6 weeks, about an hour a week. We're working on building our own personal practice. So if someone doesn't have mindfulness, that's tier 1. After that, they feel really passionate about mindfulness. They have a daily practice. We go into the curriculum training. And at the curriculum training, they're given the curriculum and the ability to teach that curriculum to their students. If there was a desire to build a nonprofit, or like we're looking right now at having some new regions, then we work on, let's see what's working. Is it better to start your own nonprofit in that area, or should we have Mindful Life Project New Jersey? So we're in this kind of like evolution of emergence. And so we look forward to looking at ecosystems and find what's the best fit for the ecosystem.
Got it. Okay, that's very cool. So the second question is, what advice would you give to someone getting started with meditation and or mindfulness?
Yeah. First, don't do it in silence. So I say that because I think a lot of times people think mindfulness is clearing the mind and just sitting in quiet. Mindfulness meditation for me is really important to be done in community with someone else and with guidance. And remember, like exercise, it's a hard habit to get used to and keep. Same thing with mindfulness. So dedicate yourself to at least 6 weeks of trying to meet every day with 5 to 8 minutes of practice, guided practice with someone, or of course, if you need to use online or an app, go for it. I would look for community areas where there's meditation centers or mindfulness classes so you can really do it relational. And don't quit, because once you get to the 5-6 weeks, you're like, oh, I feel better. And then you stop doing it. Just like we say, it's a daily habit that we want to keep going forever because it's what we need.
Absolutely. The third question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone early on their path to financial independence?
So personally, I'm coming from entrepreneur parents. My parents were both artists working together and didn't make a lot of money every year, but they used their money really well. So I think it's about getting away from the capitalism of buy, have the most, have the best, have the newest, and really trying to make sure the choices we make with money are about long-term versus short-term gratification. And then always upping your game. I tell people this a lot, like when you're working, find a passion, find your mind, body, and heart's alignment and go after it. When you follow those 3 things, you're actually going to be way better at what you do, and you're going to get better opportunities. So I started Mindful Life with no budget, no money, nothing but just this leap of faith. I was a teacher. That was the highest paying consistent job of anyone in my family. I'll say that again. As a teacher, I had the highest paying job of anyone in my family, consistent paycheck, because I come from artist family and other people in the family, they're low income. But when you jump into something, mind, body, and heart, you're going to get somewhere. So that's my recommendation is align being conservative with the fun money. Don't go out and try to buy the newest everything. Use it well. I also say real estate because that's what my parents did was buy the triplex in Berkeley, California, very low income family originally, but they were able to scrounge to get a little money and put a down payment on triplex and rent it out too. We lived downstairs and that was a big decision.
Yeah, that's what they call a house hack in the financial independence community. So that's super cool to hear that they did that. The final question is, how can people connect with you, your work, and the Mindful Life Project?
Yeah, just check out our website, mindfullifeproject.org. You'll see a contact form on there. You always can just directly email me at jg@mindfullifeproject.org and just reach out for anything. We're here. We want to partner. We want to collaborate.
Wonderful. Thank you, JG. And if you're listening to this, go and donate to the Mindful Life Project, and please mention Mindful Fire or Adam on that donation, and I will match up to $500 of donations, and JG will let me know. Thank you again. This has been incredible. I feel like we could do another one on a million different topics, so maybe in the future we'll do that.
I would love it, Adam. Thank you again for having me. Such a pleasure and honor. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode of the Mindful Fire podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with JG Larochette, the founder of the Mindful Life Project. If you got value from today's episode, please hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this. This just lets the platforms know you're getting value from the episodes and you want to be here when we produce additional content. And as a reminder, I'll be matching any donations to the Mindful Life Project up to $500. And so please donate to support the great work that JG and Mindful Life Project are doing for our young people by visiting mindfullifeproject.org, clicking donate, and mentioning Mindful Fire or my name, Adam, in the comments section of your donation. Any money that you donate will be tripled by me matching and Google matching as well. Here you can find the full show notes for today's episode, including links to connect with JG, Mindful Life Project, and to donate at mindfulfire.org/35. Thanks again, and I'll catch you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.